The house is quiet now in a way it never used to be. Not peaceful quiet. Just empty. The kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel too loud. A chair shifting against the floor. The refrigerator humming. The wind pushing against the windows at night. Sometimes I sit there and try to remember what the house sounded like before everything changed. There used to be voices. Laughter. The soft rhythm of people moving around each other without thinking about it. Someone asking a question from the other room. Someone answering without looking up from whatever they were doing. Back then, those moments felt ordinary. Almost invisible. Now they feel like something I imagined. I still go through the same routines. Wake up. Make coffee. Stand at the counter for a few seconds longer than necessary before the day begins. It all looks the same from the outside. But something important is missing from it. It's strange how you can lose something without it physically leaving the room. I didn't walk away when everything first started falling apart. That part surprises people when they hear the story. They assume there was some dramatic moment. Some explosion. A door slamming, maybe. But that's not how it happened. The truth is quieter than that. For a long time, I kept telling myself things were fine. That the strange feeling sitting in the back of my chest would pass if I just gave it time. People don't like to admit how much they depend on normal routines. You build a life around small expectations. Shared habits. Predictable days. You assume those things will always be there. And when something begins to feel slightly off, your first instinct isn't to question it. It's to protect it. Looking back now, I can see the exact moment something inside me started to shift. At the time it barely registered. It was late evening. One of those quiet nights where everyone was doing their own thing. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. She was sitting across the room with her phone. That alone meant nothing. Everyone checks their phone. Everyone sends messages. It's part of life now. But something about the way she reacted caught my attention. Not even a full reaction. Just the smallest change in expression. A quick smile. Then it disappeared almost immediately, like it wasn't meant to be seen. And then she tilted the screen away. If I had been distracted, I probably wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I remember looking back down at what I was doing and telling myself it didn't mean anything. People have private conversations all the time. Friends, coworkers, family. There was no reason to turn that moment into something suspicious. At least that's what I kept repeating in my head. Still, something about it stayed with me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even jealousy. Just a quiet discomfort that didn't belong there. Like hearing a noise in the house at night and telling yourself it's probably the wind, even though you're suddenly wide awake. That was the first time I felt it. The first time something ordinary stopped feeling ordinary. And without realizing it, I had already crossed a line. Because once you notice a small thing like that, you start noticing everything. Before we continue, if you enjoy real-life betrayal and relationship stories like this one, take a second to subscribe to the channel, Cheating Stories with Ray. Leave a like and share the video so more people can find these stories. Because sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that quietly change everything. When people hear about a relationship falling apart, they usually imagine it was fragile from the start. Like there were obvious cracks everyone ignored. But the truth is, most of the time it doesn't feel like that while you're living it. For a long time, I believed what we had was solid. Not perfect. No relationship is. But steady. Reliable. The kind of life you build piece by piece without even realizing it. We met years earlier through mutual friends. Nothing dramatic. No movie moment. Just a conversation that kept going longer than either of us expected. She had an easy way of talking to people. Calm, confident. The kind of person who made a room feel less tense without trying. At first we were just spending time together. Coffee here and there. Group dinners. Small things. Then slowly it became something more consistent. Looking back now, the thing that mattered most wasn't excitement. It was comfort. Being around her felt simple. No guessing games. No constant worrying about what the other person meant. We built routines without really planning them. Weekend mornings were usually slow. One of us would wake up earlier than the other, make coffee, leave a cup sitting on the counter. Little habits like that become invisible after a while. You stop noticing them because they're always there. Over time our lives started to merge in ways that felt natural. Shared responsibilities. Shared plans. Decisions stopped being mine or hers. They became ours. There were stressful times, of course. Work problems. Family situations. The usual pressures people carry. But we handled those things the way couples usually do. Talk through them. Move past them. At least that's how it felt. Eventually our life started revolving around more than just the two of us. Responsibilities got heavier. Days got busier. But oddly enough, that made the relationship feel even more stable. When people depend on each other every day, you start believing that bond is permanent. You don't think about the possibility of it breaking. Trust becomes something automatic. I never felt like I needed to check up on her or question where she was. That kind of thinking just didn't exist in my head. She had her life. I had mine. And in the middle of that, we shared everything that actually mattered. There were nights when we'd sit together after a long day and talk about things most people probably wouldn't find interesting. Work frustrations. Random stories about people we ran into. Plans we might make someday. Nothing dramatic. Just life. And those conversations made me feel like we were moving in the same direction. I remember once telling a friend that relationships eventually stop feeling exciting. But in a good way. They become predictable. Safe. At the time, that felt like the best possible outcome. You stop worrying about whether someone will stay. You start assuming they will. And once that belief settles in, you stop paying attention to certain things. Not because you're careless. But because trust removes the need to look closely. That's the part people don't talk about enough. When you fully trust someone, your guard disappears. You don't question small inconsistencies. You don't analyze behavior. You just live your life. And that's exactly what I was doing. Living inside something I believed was permanent. Completely unaware that somewhere along the way, the ground underneath it had already started shifting. As the years passed, our life settled into a rhythm that felt almost automatic. Days started blending into each other in a comfortable way. Work, errands, meals, small conversations before bed. Nothing extraordinary, but that was the point. It was stable. There's something about routine that makes you believe everything is secure. When the same things happen day after day, you stop imagining that anything could change. Our mornings were usually rushed. Coffee, quick updates about the day ahead, small reminders about things that needed to get done. It was ordinary, but it felt like teamwork. Evenings were slower. Sometimes we'd sit in the same room doing completely different things. She might scroll through her phone or watch something on television while I finished work or read through emails. Other nights we'd talk. Not about anything big. Just the small details people collect during the day. Who said something funny at work? Who forgot to do something they were supposed to do? It sounds simple now, but those conversations made everything feel connected. When you share the little things, you assume the big things are shared too. That belief becomes automatic. Over time, I stopped thinking of my life as separate from the relationship. Everything was built around it. Plans for the future. Financial decisions. The way time was organized. Even my sense of who I was started to shift. You don't notice that happening while it's going on. It just feels like growing older together. Trust plays a strange role in that process. The more dependable someone seems, the less attention you pay to the details. You stop watching for warning signs because you don't believe they exist. I never felt the need to check her phone. Never asked who she was talking to. Never wondered where she was going when she left the house. That kind of suspicion felt unnecessary. If anything, I was proud of the fact that our relationship didn't have that kind of tension. At least that's how I saw it. Looking back now, I can see that life was already starting to shift in ways I didn't fully recognize. It wasn't dramatic. Just small changes in behavior. She began spending more time on her phone than usual. Not constantly, but enough that I noticed it occasionally. At first I assumed it was work. Or friends. Everyone stays connected to people through their phones now. It's normal. Sometimes I would walk into a room and she would quickly finish typing something. Not hiding it exactly. Just wrapping it up. If I asked what she was doing, the answer was always simple. Just replying to someone. Or sometimes, nothing important. Those responses didn't trigger any suspicion at the time. I believed her. That's the strange thing about trust. It makes explanations feel complete even when they aren't. Another change was how often she seemed distracted. There would be moments during conversations where she seemed slightly elsewhere. Like her attention had drifted somewhere I couldn't see. I'd ask if everything was okay. She'd smile and say, "Yeah, just tired." And that was enough. Life was busy. Stress was normal. Everyone has days where they're not fully present. So I accepted those moments without questioning them. Still, every once in a while, there would be a brief pause where something felt slightly unfamiliar. Like recognizing a subtle change in someone's voice. Not enough to cause alarm. Just enough to notice. But whenever those thoughts appeared, I pushed them aside. Because after so many years of believing someone is completely on your side, the idea that they might not be feels almost impossible to accept. And at that point, I was still living inside that belief. Still trusting the life we had built together. Still assuming that whatever small changes I was noticing, had nothing to do with me. The strange feeling didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly. Quietly. At first it was just moments that didn't quite line up with the life we had been living for years. Small things. Easy to ignore if you wanted to. And for a long time, I did. Her phone started going everywhere with her. Not in an obvious way, just, always nearby. If she moved to another room, the phone went with her. If she stepped outside, it went in her pocket. Again, nothing unusual on its own. Most people do that. But when something changes from the way it used to be, you notice it. At least eventually. One night I walked into the kitchen while she was standing by the counter typing something quickly. The moment she saw me, the screen went dark. Not slammed shut. Not hidden. Just turned off. "Who were you talking to?" I asked without really thinking. She shrugged a little. "Just someone from work." The answer sounded normal enough. But the way she said it felt rehearsed. Like the response was already waiting. I remember standing there for a second longer than necessary before nodding and moving on. At the time, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Work conversations happen at odd hours. People send messages late. None of that meant anything. But the moment stayed in my mind longer than it should have. Then there were the late evenings. She started going out more often than she used to. Sometimes it was framed as meeting friends. Other times it was work-related gatherings. Again, nothing unusual about that. People have lives outside their homes. But what began to bother me wasn't the fact that she was leaving. It was how vague the explanations became. Just meeting some people. Probably won't be late. Don't wait up. Those phrases started appearing more frequently. If I asked for details, she would answer, but always in a way that felt slightly incomplete. Names were mentioned less often. Stories about the night were shorter when she came home. Once or twice I noticed she smelled like a place I couldn't quite identify. Not perfume. Not anything obvious. Just unfamiliar. I told myself I was imagining it. The mind is good at filling empty spaces when it wants answers. There were also moments when she seemed oddly protective of her personal space. If I sat down too close while she was using her phone, the screen tilted slightly away. Not dramatically. Just enough that I couldn't see it clearly. Again, if you looked at each of these things separately, they meant nothing. That's the part that made it so difficult. There was never one big sign. Just dozens of small ones. And each time I noticed something, my first instinct was to dismiss it. Because questioning someone you trust feels wrong. It almost feels like betrayal in itself. So I kept quiet. I told myself relationships go through phases. People get busy. People become distracted. Life changes. Still, something inside me had started paying closer attention. I didn't want to admit it, but I was watching. Not in a confrontational way. More like someone trying to confirm that the strange noise they heard was really nothing. And the more I paid attention, the more the pattern became impossible to ignore. Messages that appeared late at night. Phone calls that ended quickly when I entered the room. Sudden moments of distance where she seemed emotionally somewhere else. I never accused her of anything. Not once. But inside my head, a quiet argument was starting to take shape. Part of me kept saying I was imagining things. Another part kept replaying those small moments over and over. Trying to connect them. Trying to understand what they meant. The hardest part wasn't suspicion. It was uncertainty. Because without proof, every thought felt unfair. Every question felt like an accusation I didn't want to make. So instead of confronting anything, I kept watching. And the more I watched, the more I started to realize something uncomfortable. The life I thought I understood perfectly, suddenly had pieces I couldn't see anymore. The moment itself wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No doors slamming. No scene you'd recognize from a movie. It happened quietly. Almost by accident. One evening she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she stepped into another room. That wasn't something she usually did anymore, but in that moment she seemed distracted. I noticed it immediately. Not because I planned to look. Just because it was there. The screen lit up a few seconds later with a message notification. At first I wasn't even trying to read it. My eyes just caught a few words before I could stop myself. Something about missing her. The kind of message that doesn't belong in a casual conversation. I remember standing there for a moment, staring at the phone like it had suddenly become something unfamiliar. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion. I picked the phone up before I had fully decided to do it. Even now I still wonder if that was the exact moment everything truly changed. Because once I looked, there was no going back. The message thread opened automatically when the screen unlocked. And there it was. Conversation after conversation. Some recent. Some going back weeks. Maybe longer. The words themselves weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were comfortable. Familiar. Too familiar. The kind of tone people use when they know each other well. There were inside jokes. References to moments I had never heard about. Plans being hinted at without being clearly stated. And beneath all of it, something obvious. Intimacy. I felt my stomach drop in a way that's hard to describe. It wasn't like discovering something new. It was more like suddenly understanding something that had been sitting in front of you the entire time. All those small moments I had ignored started rearranging themselves in my mind. The late nights. The quick smiles at her phone. The vague explanations. They weren't random anymore. They were pieces of the same picture. I stood there reading just long enough to know what I needed to know. Then I put the phone back exactly where it had been. My hands were shaking slightly, but I tried to keep my breathing steady. A few seconds later she walked back into the kitchen. I must have looked strange because she paused when she saw me. "Everything okay?" she asked. Her voice sounded normal. Completely normal. For a second I wondered if I had imagined everything. If maybe there was some explanation I hadn't considered. But the words were still fresh in my mind. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked a question. "Who is he?" The silence that followed told me more than any explanation ever could. She looked at me like someone trying to quickly decide which version of the truth to use. "What do you mean?" she said. I nodded toward the phone. I saw the message. Another pause. Then she picked up the phone and stared at the screen for a moment, as if seeing it for the first time. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. That sentence. It's almost automatic when people get caught. The strange thing is that hearing it didn't make me angry. Not right away. Instead, I felt something inside me go very still. Because deep down, I already knew. "I wasn't trying to read your messages," I said. "I just saw the notification." She didn't respond immediately. Instead she leaned back against the counter and looked down at the floor. After a few seconds she spoke again. It didn't mean anything. The words sounded fragile. Like they had already started falling apart before she finished saying them. I remember studying her face in that moment, searching for something familiar. But the person standing in front of me suddenly felt like someone I didn't know very well. "How long?" I asked. She hesitated. "A while," she admitted. That was the moment the truth fully settled in. Not when I saw the messages. Not when I asked the question. But when she said that. Because it meant everything I had suspected had been real. And the life I thought we were living together had been sharing space with something else the entire time. The strange thing is, I didn't leave. People assume that once the truth comes out, the next step is obvious. You pack a bag. You walk out. You start over. But life doesn't usually move that cleanly. After that night, everything felt suspended. Like the world had paused and neither of us knew how to press play again. We talked for hours at first. Not loudly. Not angrily. Mostly in circles. She said it hadn't been planned. That it had started as conversations that went too far. That it didn't mean what it looked like. There were apologies. A lot of them. "I made a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened." Those sentences repeated in different forms throughout the night. I listened to all of it without interrupting very much. Part of me wanted to believe what she was saying. Another part already knew the damage had been done. Eventually the conversation slowed down. We were both exhausted. And that's when the practical thoughts started appearing. What would happen if I left? What would change? Life wasn't just two people deciding whether to stay together anymore. There were responsibilities. Stability. A structure we had spent years building. Walking away would mean tearing all of that apart. So I told myself I needed time to think. Days passed. Then weeks. And somehow, without making a clear decision, I stayed. At first I convinced myself it was temporary. Just until emotions settled. Just until I understood what I wanted. But the longer I remained, the harder it became to separate my reasons. She promised things would be different. That the contact had ended. That she wanted to repair what we had. I nodded when she said those things. But inside, something fundamental had already shifted. Trust doesn't break loudly. It disappears quietly. Suddenly every ordinary moment carried a question behind it. If she went out somewhere, my mind followed her. If her phone lit up across the room, I noticed it immediately. Even when nothing suspicious was happening, the possibility sat there in the background. That constant awareness is exhausting. Before, I had moved through the relationship without thinking about it. Now every interaction required effort. I watched myself becoming quieter. Conversations became shorter. There were long stretches of time where we sat in the same room without speaking. She tried, at first, to fill that silence. Asking if I was okay. Suggesting we spend more time together. Trying to return things to the way they had been. But the problem with broken trust is that you can't pretend it never happened. Even small gestures start feeling complicated. A kind word makes you wonder if it's genuine. A smile makes you question what's hidden behind it. And over time, that tension started changing me. I stopped sharing certain thoughts. Stopped asking certain questions. It felt easier to withdraw than to risk hearing something that might reopen the wound. Weeks turned into months. From the outside, our life probably looked mostly normal. We still lived in the same house. Still moved through the same daily routines. But internally, the relationship felt hollow. Like the structure was still standing, but something essential inside it had collapsed. The worst part was realizing how much I had begun to shrink inside my own life. I was still there physically. Still showing up for responsibilities. But emotionally, I felt like a guest in something that used to belong to me. And the longer I stayed, the more that feeling grew. Time has a way of revealing things people try to bury. At first, I believed the version of the story she gave me that night. Not completely, but enough to keep things moving forward. She said it had ended. Said it had gone too far and she regretted it. For a while, I accepted that explanation because it was easier than pulling the whole thing apart again. But once something like that happens, you start noticing things differently. Little inconsistencies that didn't stand out before begin to surface. Months later, pieces of the story started changing. Not in dramatic ways. Just small corrections. A timeline that shifted slightly when it came up in conversation. Details that sounded a little different from the first time she explained them. At first I thought maybe it was just memory. People misremember things all the time. But eventually I realized something uncomfortable. The situation hadn't been as brief as she originally said. It had gone on longer. Much longer. I never found out every detail, and strangely enough, I stopped trying to. Because by that point, the exact timeline didn't really matter anymore. The important part had already become clear. The version of the relationship I had been trying to hold on to, didn't exist anymore. It had ended the moment trust disappeared, even though we were both still standing in the same house pretending it could be rebuilt. And recognizing that truth didn't make me angry. It made things strangely calm. Like the moment when a storm finally passes and you can see clearly what it left behind. Before we go further, if this story has you thinking about what you would do in a situation like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, Cheating Stories with Ray. Leave a like on the video and drop a comment below telling us what you think. Would you have stayed, or walked away the moment the truth came out? Because sometimes the hardest part of a betrayal isn't discovering it. It's realizing how long you tried to live with it afterward. I remember the night I finally understood what staying had been doing to me. It wasn't during an argument. There wasn't some final confession or dramatic moment that forced the realization. It happened quietly. I was standing near the living room window after everyone had gone to sleep. The house was dark except for the reflection staring back at me in the glass. For a second, I didn't recognize the person I was looking at. Not physically. Just, something about the expression. The man in the reflection looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Like someone who had been holding something heavy for too long without putting it down. And that's when the thought finally formed clearly. Staying hadn't been protecting anything. Not the relationship. Not the life we built. Not even the people I told myself I was staying for. All it had done was slowly erase parts of me. Every compromise. Every moment of silence. Every time I ignored that voice in my head telling me something wasn't right. Piece by piece, I had traded my own peace just to keep something familiar standing. And maybe that's the part people struggle with the most. Because loyalty feels like strength. Endurance feels like love. But sometimes the line between commitment and self-destruction is thinner than we want to admit. So I still think about that question sometimes. At what point does holding on stop being loyalty, and start becoming the reason you disappear?